Well, let's tackle Good Omens first because
Yes.
I love your score for this because for me it is a study in contrasts between darkness and the divine, and yet it has this tone of playfulness throughout that I really respond to. And I'm wondering, giving musical voice to those contrasts, was that a particular challenge that came with this project for you?
I mean, I think I've always had the same sort of raison d'etre for writing to pictures. When I look at something, it says, this is what I need. And everything that you just said about the show is what the show sort of asked me for. I mean, it is about those things. It's about a lot of things as well, but you have to have a sort of central tenet. You need to have something which, everyone can agree on is the heart of it, because then all the other stuff, the crazy stuff, the wild stuff can fly around and, like something which is, attached to a centrifuge. I mean, it can spin round and feel like it's out of control, but it's always anchored to the sort of heart of what's going on. So you've got all these different pieces of music and different things that are happening in different time periods and in different places and places that exist or, if you're not a believer, don't exist. And people who aren't people, entities that aren't human, with who seem to sort of portray and identify what being human actually is more effectively than anyone else does. When that's all there, you just, like when you read a book, you just have to open yourself to the experience and allow your feelings and your response to the story to sort of guide you in the writing. So if that show hadn't have been there, then that music wouldn't have been there either.
It's also emblematic of a lot of your work, and what I love most about your work is that it's so melodic. There are melodies present, and I find that that's kind of a dying art form in film composition lately. Do you automatically hear in terms of melody?
It's sort of my go-to answer. When anyone says I'm doing something, or I'm always looking for the music. There's an awful lot that you can create with sound now, which it can occupy a certain sort of musical space in a show, but it's not necessarily what we would call music, which is fine because for some shows and for some films, that's exactly the right thing to do. And there's plenty of evidence of great work being done in all of these areas, but I think it came down to just when I go to concerts or if I'm listening to music, I tend to want to listen to melody, and when I'm walking along, melody is the thing that I hear and that I respond to. And when I go and see a concert of film music or any music, it's like you can feel the sense of cohesion that happens when a great tune hits a room. The whole place responds to it. Everyone connects to it. It's a very, very strange phenomenon. Music is a phenomenon which lights up every aspect, every part of your brain, and it triggers something within your brain, which in terms of movement, in terms of memory, in terms of heartbeat, breathing rates. Music can affect all of that, and it's a complex method by which it gets to all those parts of the brain, but it's the only thing that actually does. And melody is the thing that sort of delivers it to the heart, I think. I think you can have visceral music, which might be lacking in melody, but it has an effect in a certain way. But I always think in terms of melody, and I think that just comes from a very deeply built-in love of a good tune. I'm always, it's like when someone says, "Oh, wait till you hear the sound of this," or "Wait till you hear the sound of that," and I'll go like, "Well, let's just not worry about that. What's it about?" It's about when someone's telling you a story and they're explaining, like how many different colours the sky is. You go like, yeah, but what's it actually about? I know it's a robot and a giant and a monster and a cloud, or but what's it actually about? What actually happens? And that's what music does. It tells you the truth. And great music, great melody, just unlocks so many things. So it's my go-to thing is write a tune. If I was going to try and précis that last 5 minutes of gibberish, then I would say my go-to method is write a tune.
I love what you're saying, because every time I look at a film, and I'm sure you as a composer, an assistant storyteller, and essentially an interpreter, you do the same. You consider, what is this movie really about? And that transcends plot. Plot is something different a lot of times.
Yeah.
And what the pieces actually trying to say.
Happens. That's what happens. The plot is what happens, but what is it actually about is different.
Yeah. So how do you work? Say when A Good Omens comes to you, do you start formulating ideas from a scripted page, or do you wait for the first imagery?
Well, everything is different. There's never been this is what normally happens. I mean, I can tell you what happened with Good Omens, just to let you know how that became the thing that it became. But there are plenty of evidence of other things where sometimes I've read a script and I've thought of something, sometimes I've read a script and I've thought of something, and then I've seen the film and I go like, well, that idea has nothing to do with what's actually, emerged. And sometimes there's even a change of casting can change the way that you think about a character. The way that an actor decides to play it makes it feel differently to what it is on the page, and that's the great glory of working on these the team sport things. You appreciate that other artists will bring something to it and surprise you. I've seen the written word on a page, and then I've seen an actor inject it with something which gives it so much more definition and so much more clarity and so much more emotion and so much more impact. And it makes you think about that character differently, and that's, in a way, you have to consider all of these things when you're writing the music, because it's not just about how do I feel about it, but how does it impact on character, how does it impact on that character's relationship with everything else and everyone else that's in the show. So my ideal thing was when I get asked to do something, especially if it's TV, is that do we have a title sequence? Because title sequences for me are like the shop window. It's the great shop window. And like at Christmas, if you're walking along, I don't know what a typical one would be in America. Maybe it's Macy's or something, or a famous shop that famously does its window displays at Christmas, and you can't help but look at and want to go in. That's what a great title sequence will do. It will kind of give you a hint of what's to come, and it will invite you into the world, and you will know by looking at it that that's a place that you want to go and you want to find out more about it. And a great title sequence will do that, whether it's a film or a TV show. Now, in the script, there was a title sequence mentioned, but it was always going to be the music was always going to be Buddy Holly, Every Day. That was so, which was a kind of neat, slightly, the sort of opposite of what you would expect for that sort of thing. So it would work in a sort of contrary way. But I think that songs in shows a lot of the time are a bit like a great joke. It's like when it appears, it has this great impact that you can't do with score, because it has familiarity, unless it's subsequently a sequel where you've got a great theme that turns up again. That has the same effect. But in a show, to start off with, when you have a familiar song, it has a certain impact, but that impact tends to sort of evaporate fairly quickly, because then you have something which is unrelated to what's going on in the story, and it just plays, and we know what happens in the song. So the effect kind of rubs off a little bit, and it becomes less impactful the longer it goes on. And to a certain extent, when it's something new, if you're looking at something familiar in a show that is new, the familiarity for me when I'm looking at it makes me want it to be over quicker so I could get onto the new stuff. Because I wouldn't necessarily want to listen to a version of a song that I already know and love 6 times. But I was sort of mildly disappointed, because the great thing about doing these shows, and there aren't that many of them that give you the opportunity to write a title sequence, is that it's a shop window for the show, but it's also a great platform for the music, for the language of the music, for the way that the music occupies its own space in the show, and it's a way of it becoming familiar with you and you becoming familiar with it. I've always felt like music with moving images it's a bit of a hand-holding exercise. It's sort of leading you along a path and making sure you don't fall off, but you're still, you're sort of being guided through certain aspects of it, and sometimes it leads you to make your own mind up, and sometimes it pushes you, and sometimes it pulls you, and sometimes it just steadies you, your title sequence is like your introduction to that relationship, and it's to say something about the show. It's to say this is the kind of world that you're about to step into. So I asked early on whether or not they would consider an original piece of music, and I said, well, look, I'm going to do it anyway, and I'll play it to you, and if you don't like it, then we've always got Buddy Holly. And so in that process, in the early days of the show, I was asked to then do 6 different versions of Every Day by Buddy Holly for the end titles. There was a sort of Carmina Burana version, a sort of Shakespearean, sort of folky version of it, children's choir, a heavy metal, death metal version. All these things were in the script, and so that was the first job I did, was do all these different versions of Buddy Holly, and at the same time I was coming up with my idea for a theme for the show, and Doug and Neil came along to the studio one day, and I said, to listen to it, and it was fairly early on, and I did the usual thing. I talked for half an hour because procrastination is everything, and you don't want a decision. In a way, you'd rather not anyone listen to it and have an opinion because you're so close to it. But eventually, Doug told me to shut up and play it, and I did, and they liked it. I think Neil said, he listened to it. He goes, "That's the theme for Good Omens, and it always was, and it always has been." So that's about, I suppose, a bigger recommendation as you're going to get. And from that point on, we were flying. From that point on, pretty much we were hand in hand, stylistically, emotionally, temperature-wise, throughout the entire show, and it was an absolute joy. So I'm glad I did it.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that we created that, because it did feel important. And also, I think about doing concerts and everything, and it's great to be able to do a theme from a show live, and it's great for people to be able to hear it and relive it and have that moment again, because if you are doing a show and it turns out that the main theme for the show is a song that everybody knows, if you go out and do a concert, no one's going to really remember 4M6 version 3 revision 7. They want to hear the tune. People like tunes. They respond to them, especially in a live situation, in a way that nothing else really can do. And you only need to go. There's a reason why all these big film music concerts tend to have the same sort of thing. It's like that you'll always have Star Wars and Raiders and Superman and James Bond and Chariots of Fire and Godfather, like Rocky, like the great big tunes from great big movies. They always play so well.
I agree with you, and it's the same kind of principle of, last weekend when Tarantino's latest movie came out, a lot of people heard those songs, and then later they played them in their car, and it would automatically, they'd feel like they were reliving the movie they just saw through those melodies. And it's the same thing I find with film score. It kind of sticks to your bones, and it's the conduit to continuing that relationship you have with that particular film.
Yeah.
But here's a question I have about composition. I've heard hit songwriters, which you've crafted some gorgeous songs for the Bond pictures, especially. I've heard them say that a lot of it is instinctual. If it comes to them, then and they write it in kind of a flash, they know that's a hit or that works. But if they have to really labor over it, those are usually the ones that don't turn out so well. Is that akin to what film composition is sometimes?
Yeah. Sometimes you have to sit and grind it out, and it's really, really hard work. And sometimes something just appears under your fingers, which it's almost like it's been delivered to you, and it says, "Here I am, recognize me." And I think part of the craft as well is the ability to recognize music while it's kind of gestating in your own mind. A lot of the time you're sort of walking along and you just happen to be thinking of something in your head. You're not thinking of music, but there's music in your head. You're walking along, you're doing something else. And I'm always very aware that music is happening, and I stop and I think about it, and I think, is that something that is new, or is that just something that I've recalling? Is it a song that I heard? Is it a song? And when it becomes obvious that actually I don't know what that is, I don't know what it is, but it feels familiar. And great melodies, I think, have a sense of familiarity to them. Now you can carve these things out of nothing, just with hard graft and great instinct, and that's been done plenty of times. Sometimes you have the first three notes and it takes you 3 months to get the next three, and sometimes the whole thing arrives fully formed, and there are no hard and fast rules. I wish they all arrived fully formed with very little effort, but they don't. But when they do, I'm always extraordinarily grateful, but then you have this odd disconnect where you feel like, actually, this has nothing to do with me. All I've done is caught it.
Yeah. Don't question it.
Like someone's battered it over a fence from somewhere, and I just happen to have the big glove on.
Well, you've crafted so many iconic scores, and I know that sometimes scores can be used for different goals. When you're crafting a Independence Day or something, you know that you need something rah and anthemic, and you need this propulsion here. But I'm curious about the more delicate material, and I'm thinking in terms of comedy, because I would think that comedic elements in a story, or a flat-out comedy, or romantic comedies, which I know you've done too, they might need a bit more of a delicate approach, because you don't want to step on the joke necessarily with your score.
No, well, I don't think there's any great trick to writing music for any situation, whether it's drama or science fiction or a love story or comedy, because it literally is. It's timing and feeling. Comedy probably relies a little more on timing, but that's also to do with feeling the rhythm of the gag. It's finding out where the gag is actually starting, being aware of its ramp, and being aware of where it needs to land, and you help to propel a joke without ever trying to be funny. It's like you must never, ever, ever write what you think. What is funny music? There is no such thing, right? You can have things which are sort of vaguely cartoony, which, if you're writing a vague cartoon, is fine. But, unless you're making a very distinctive, creative point, then trying to be funny with music is usually disastrous in comedy, because it's basically saying, laugh here. Or this bit is funny. And the thing about comedy is that some people think something's funny and some people think other things are funny. If you're watching a comedy and some people are going to think 100% of it is hilarious, and some people are going to think 60%, and some people are going to think 30%. So you have to play the whole thing straight, so there's enough there for people who might not necessarily get the gag to enjoy the movie. But it's all about understanding the feel, and this goes back to that thing about knowing the truth about the story. What's it actually about? In a scene where it's funny, you've got to know what's actually happening, and that's where comedy works. It usually works against the backdrop of something sort of serious. Something is happening that we have to take seriously in order for the ridiculousness of the comedy to work against that. Because if everything is silly, then nothing is funny. It's like if the world is made of jelly, then coming across a jelly house isn't going to be unusual. So if I don't even know where that came from, but if everything's wacky and odd and weird, then nothing is really that funny, is it? I mean, once you get used to it, it's like special effects. Once you get used to special effects, once you get used to the wait till you see the monster, oh my God, that monster's amazing. Now what?
It mirrors what actors say about comedy too, which is we never play the joke. I mean, we're playing it seriously. That's what, with utter conviction. That's what makes it so funny. Yeah,
of course.
Yeah.
Of course. If you're watching a person walking up a slippery incline and they fall over, it's slapstick, right? If someone is spending the entire journey up that slippery hill falling over, it's not really slapstick, then it's tragedy. Yeah, it's a thin line, and also depending on what you find funny. That's true of anything. What do you find moving? What do you find interesting? What do you find exciting?
Talking about what you find exciting, and I know that I've been told that I have to let you go at the top of the hour, so this will be my last question. But believe me, I could talk to you for 3 or 4 hours because your work fascinates me. But I usually ask all the composers I speak to, if you, and I'm sure that you've probably taught or lectured about film composition to eager students, if you were to pick 3 or 4 essential scores that you would use to teach specific lessons to composers that want to get started in the business, which ones would they be?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I do a lot of talking to classes and students about film music, but I never really get into the specifics. I don't do, today we're going to learn about brass voicing. I mean, there's a kind of understanding that people at that level will know about music. They can write music. And in a way, I think the last thing you should do as a film composer is listen to other film scores. I think you should watch a lot of movies and understand why things work and how they work, and try and have an understanding about why a particular approach has affected you in that way. Why does this make you feel cold? Because my opinion on it is going to be different to yours. I could hold up a piece of film, a film as an example of something that I think is very good. But if you're sitting there thinking, actually, you know what, I think that's terrible, then me telling you it's good isn't going to make you like it anymore. Any more than me, giving you a plate of food and telling you how wonderful it is, but you taste it and you're like, do you know what, I just don't like it. And me telling you why it's great isn't going to make you like it anymore. I do think that single-mindedness and having an idea and opinion of your own is the most important thing you can do, because when you're asked to do a film, people want you to bring the solution. They want you to come with the answer. They don't want you to say, what do you want me to do, or how do you think I should do it? They want you to come with an angle and say, this is what I'm hearing, and this is the reason why I'm hearing it, and this is why I think we should try it like this, with the obvious caveats, of you discuss it and you see the movie and you think of a way that it might work, all those things. But ideally, you want to be able to watch it and say, I know what this needs. This is what I think we could do with this to make it really, really interesting. I think it's. I don't listen to other film scores out of context of watching the movie, and I'm watching the movie for a specific reason, because I want to know what happens and I want to know what it's about. Knowing about film music, all it happens is it makes me appreciate good work more, and it makes me be able to identify why I think something doesn't work more easily. I'm more aware of when things don't work, the reasons why I feel that is. It doesn't always necessarily stop me enjoying a film. If it's a music cue that doesn't feel right to me, then I'll know the reason why I feel like that. But I might be sitting next to someone who thinks it's the best cue in the world. The Bond thing is the perfect, exemplar of that, isn't it? For some people, John Barry will never be bettered, and for some people, Tom Newman will never be bettered. It's just there's always going to be someone who likes one thing and doesn't like another thing, and that's something you can't really ever worry about. So my discussions that I have with students is about finding your voice and having your opinion and knowing the truth about what the world is like in film and TV, rather than glossing over it or painting it as a sort of shiny way and say let's spend 2 hours writing a woodwind only piece for this scene in Kramer versus Kramer to see how you do it. It's like get a new film, find a new voice. That's already been addressed. This film has been seen to, it's been taken care of, it's out of the hospital. It's like you don't need to go in and re-break its leg and see if you want to set it in a different way. Leave it alone. Wait for a patient that's come in with a different break and see what you can do about that. So I wouldn't do that. I could tell people what my favourite scores are, but they're not necessarily particularly good scores for particularly good films. Necessarily, they're just my favourites.
Yeah.
It's like I know that I like eating certain sorts of food. That if you analysed it as a in terms of its nutritional value, some things that I like aren't nutritionally sound, and some things that I like are. But those are the things that I like. So
I like what you're saying,
and stand up in front of someone and saying, you know what, that thing that you like, you shouldn't eat it. It's okay to say you can eat it in, bits of it sometimes, but not all the time. But people know that sort of thing anyway. But sometimes, no one's pretending that a can of Coke is a bottle of Moët Chandon. No one's pretending that. They're both drinks. They're both fizzy. Sometimes you want a Coke. Sometimes you want champagne.
That is the most unique answer I've ever had to that question, because I asked that of all my composers that I interview, and I love that answer because it encourages people to find their own musical voice. There's no formula.
I also slightly struggle with the idea of teaching film music to people, because it's like teaching creative writing. You can teach people the tools. You can teach people grammar. You can teach them sentence structure. You can teach them, how to spell. But how do you teach them how to write? You don't. You have to let them write, and then you critique what they've written. But you can't tell them this is how you do it, because there's going to be 100 examples of how something has worked brilliantly by not doing that.
Once again, I've most of my adult life, I've been listening to your work, and I adore it. I really do. So I can't thank you enough.
How old are you? This is when it gets scary. I found some tapes. I've just cleaned out a couple of storage units that I had. And it's like you just end up amassing things, and you feel like I can't really have all that in my house. Just boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff. So you put it in a storage unit. Anyway, I got it all out the other day because I've got, built a big shed in the garden, so I'm just going to keep it in there. And just been finding loads and loads of old stuff, and I found the Old Masters for the Young Americans, which is the first film I ever did. And I was with a guy today, and he looked at it, he goes, was it it was like 13th of April or something, 1993. He goes, that's the year I was born. And I'm talking to this bloke as on equal footing. That's really weird.
I am 45, so I am a fully adult person.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I don't feel
we're
too
okay.
bad then. Like, since I was a baby. As long as I don't have that horrible creeping realization that I could be your father, that's close enough for me to not worry about it. Thanks.
Well, you are great. You are the tops of my eyes, and I really appreciate
you're very,
your time,
very
Steve.
kind. And for asking questions which no one normally does. They usually, sometimes it's all about, how do you think of your ideas? Well, you're very kind. Thanks for putting up with me.